The boat bobbed and creaked beneath me as we cut through the restless sea, the water dark and ominous, stretching out beneath a pale, gray sky. My hands gripped the railing so tightly my knuckles ached, the cold air biting at my skin as the island slowly began to emerge through the mist. The shoreline was jagged, cliffs rising sharply from the sea like the teeth of some ancient beast. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, tall and desolate at the highest point, its once proud tower now a dark silhouette against the horizon, a forgotten relic of a time long gone. This island, I knew, had always been an enigma, a place wrapped in myth, soaked in sorrow. Few had ventured here, and even fewer had returned. I had read the stories. Sailors lost to violent storms, disappearances shrouded in mystery, and the winds that whispered warnings to the brave or the foolish enough to listen. But to me, this place meant something more. It was a puzzle, a mystery buried deep under layers of salt and time, waiting to be uncovered. As a marine biologist, I had come to study the unique ecosystems of the region, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else waited here for me. Something I hadn't anticipated. The engine sputtered, and I glanced back at Captain Bartholomew Rhodes, who was at the helm, his face a mask of indifference. A man of the sea, Rhodes had seen it all: storms, shipwrecks, ghost stories, tall tales, but even he couldn't shake the unease that clung to this place. "You ever been here before?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the growl of the engine. Rhodes didn't look at me, but kept his eyes fixed on the island. "I've sailed these waters enough times. Never stopped at this godforsaken place, though. Not many do." His words struck me harder than I expected. There was something in his tone, casual yet heavy, that unsettled me. There was something about this island, something in the very air, something that seemed to watch us, waiting. The boat lurched as it hit a patch of rough water. I staggered, my heart skipping a beat. Catching my balance, I looked back at the shore. The mist had thickened, curling around the jagged rocks like the tendrils of smoke, and the lighthouse stood tall above, its glass eye long shattered, its structure crumbling under the relentless forces of the sea. The closer we got, the stranger the atmosphere became. The air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me like an invisible weight. The wind howled through the rigging, but there was something else, a faint melodic whisper, a hum that felt ancient, as if it had been here long before I arrived. Elena. My breath caught. Was it the wind, or was it something more? The whisper had been unmistakable, calling my name. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it, but the chill crawling up my spine refused to leave. The boat scraped against the rocky shore with a loud grind, pulling me from my thoughts. Rhodes cut the engine, and an eerie silence followed, heavier than the storm we had just passed through. The only sound was the crash of waves against the rocks and the wind rustling through the sparse trees. I stepped off the boat, my boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. Every part of me felt like it was being swallowed by the oppressive silence of the place. Rhodes followed, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, though something about him seemed different now, uneasy, almost watchful. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice low, hesitant. It's one thing to study marine life, and another to poke around places like this. "I'm here for the science," I replied, trying to steady my voice, though a nervous flutter stirred deep inside. "This is part of it. I need to know why it's here, why it was abandoned." Rhodes snorted and glanced at the crumbling lighthouse. "You've got your work cut out for you. This place doesn't exactly scream welcoming." The closer we got to the base of the lighthouse, the more the fog thickened, swirling around us like it had a mind of its own. The structure was unsettling. Stone walls eaten away by years of salt and wind, windows shattered, and the door hanging by a single rusted hinge. It seemed to lean inward, as though it couldn't bear the weight of its own history. That's when I heard it again. The whispers, faint but persistent, brushing against my ears. Light it. The words weren't spoken. They felt like they were etched directly into my mind, a soft, undeniable call. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart hammering in my chest. The air around us had thickened, pressing in from all sides. My eyes darted to Rhodes, but he simply raised an eyebrow. "Nothing but the wind," he said with a chuckle, though I could see the uncertainty flicker in his eyes. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was nothing more than my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Something was here. Something had been here for a long time. The voices were real, growing louder each night, persistent whispers carried by the wind. And now, standing at the foot of the lighthouse, I felt an unshakable pull, a connection to something far below the surface of the sea. But I couldn't focus on that. Not yet. I was here for answers. The island was my domain now, not the other way around. We stepped into the lighthouse, and the door groaned open, revealing the interior. A dark, musty space, the smell of mildew thick in the air. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating strange markings on the stone walls, markings that seemed like an ancient language, faded with time. Rhodes whistled low. "This place is something else." But my attention was elsewhere. The whispers came again, louder this time. "Light it." The words pulsed, urgent, and my heart raced. I turned, and there, just at the edge of my vision, a figure. A shadow, flickering, fleeting. My breath caught. But when I turned to get a better look, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Rhodes gave me an odd look. "See what?" "You didn't see it?" I asked again. But he shook his head, scanning the shadows. "Imagining things," he said, but I knew better. I had seen it, I had felt it. Something was here, something waiting. And with the whispers growing louder, I realized that this place, this island, held secrets far darker than I had ever anticipated. I had come here to study the sea, but the island, it had its own agenda. The night crept in quickly, as it always did on this forsaken island, a suffocating cloak of darkness that swallowed the world whole. I stood at the narrow window of the small cabin I had claimed for the duration of my stay, gazing out at the lighthouse. Its silhouette was barely visible through the thick fog that rolled in with the evening tide. The island, bathed in shadow, seemed to pulse with an unnatural stillness, like it was holding its breath. Even the sea had stilled, the usual thunderous crash of waves muted by the oppressive quiet. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with the scent of salt and old wood. I felt the weight of the place, a slow, creeping pressure on my chest, as though the very walls were pressing in on me. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the unease gnawing at me. This was supposed to be a scientific expedition, a straightforward study of the marine ecosystem. But something about the island unsettled me, something I couldn't quite place, but the feeling only grew stronger as the night deepened. Turning away from the window, I glanced at the equipment strewn across the small table. Maps, research notes, and samples from the day's dives, all abandoned in favor of the unease that haunted me. The fire in the hearth crackled faintly, a weak attempt to push back the chill that had seeped into my bones. My mind wandered back to the lighthouse and to the whispering winds that had plagued me since my arrival. Light it, light the beacon. The words drifted to the forefront of my thoughts again, as they had every night since I first set foot on this island. They had been faint at first, just whispers in the back of my mind, like the echo of a distant memory. But tonight, they were different. Louder, more urgent. I could almost feel them vibrating in my skull, twisting around my thoughts, pulling me toward the lightless tower on the cliff. I stood, my legs shaky from a mixture of exhaustion and something more primal, an inexplicable pull I couldn't deny. My hand trembled as I reached for the door. I didn't know why I was drawn to the lighthouse, why the whispers had taken such hold of me, but I could feel them now, curling around me like smoke, urging me to go. It was as though the island itself had come alive, speaking to me in ways I couldn't comprehend. Outside, the wind howled, whipping through the trees and rattling the cabin's old wooden frame. I stepped out into the darkness, my breath misting in the cold air. The path to the lighthouse was barely visible, swallowed by the thick fog that clung to the ground like a living thing. My flashlight beam barely cut through the dense mist, the light swallowed by the endless gray. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the earth itself was resisting my progress, urging me to turn back. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop, not now. The whispering grew louder, a constant hum in my mind. Light it, light the beacon. The sound of it grew almost rhythmic, like the beating of a drum, each thrum a pull on my very soul. By the time I reached the base of the lighthouse, the fog had thickened, coiling around the stone like some ancient serpent. The air was colder now, the wind biting into my skin. The door to the lighthouse creaked on its rusted hinges as I pushed it open. The sound was loud in the silent night, like a warning. The smell of rot and decay hit me like a slap, the scent of years of abandonment mingling with the salt of the sea. Inside, the darkness swallowed me whole. I fumbled for the flashlight again, my hand shaking as the beam flickered to life, casting weak light against the peeling walls. The air felt colder here, as though the temperature had dropped in an instant. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and I could have sworn I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I turned quickly, heart thudding in my chest, but the space was empty, just the crumbling ruins of a once proud structure. The stairs to the beacon tower wound upward in a narrow spiral, the ancient stone steps worn smooth by decades of neglect. My feet echoed against the stone as I climbed, each step amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded me. The whispers were louder now, filling the air, drowning out everything else. Light it. Light the beacon. The words were clearer than ever, and this time I thought I could hear something else beneath them, a low, guttural sound that resonated deep in my chest, like a growl. I paused, my breath catching, and for the first time since I arrived, a deep, bone-chilling fear began to settle in my stomach. I reached the top, gripping the railing tightly as I stepped into the beacon room. The machinery was rusted, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. The glass of the lantern shattered long ago. The faintest traces of moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long, ghostly shadows across the floor. But it wasn't the state of the lantern that caught my attention. It was the feeling of presence that filled the room. The unmistakable sense that I wasn't alone. Light it. The whisper seemed to come from directly behind me, as though someone, or something, was standing just over my shoulder. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows, shifting in the corners of my vision, as though the very darkness had come alive. The whisper came again, this time louder, more insistent. I could almost feel the breath against my ear, cold and damp. Light the beacon, Elena, light the beacon. Elena. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was clear, unmistakable, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to come from the depths of the ocean itself. My breath caught in my throat. Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. And then, just as suddenly as the voice had appeared, the room fell silent. I stood frozen in place, my pulse racing. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt the pull again, stronger than ever, urging me to light the beacon. It wasn't a request, it was a command that I couldn't ignore, couldn't escape. I turned back to the broken lantern, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, feeling the rust beneath my fingertips. The words came again, now full of hunger, full of rage. "Light it, light the beacon." It was then that I felt it. A chill, deep and ancient, creeping down my spine. The air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive, and I suddenly realized that the whispering had stopped. But it wasn't the silence I had expected. It was the kind of silence that preceded something terrible, something inevitable. Behind me, in the corner of the room, a shadow moved. A shape, dark, shifting and indistinct, formed in the gloom. My breath hitched. I wasn't alone anymore. What are you?" I gasped, but the figure remained silent, its presence growing stronger, more suffocating. Slowly, it began to take shape. Tendrils of darkness stretching toward me, and from the depths of the room, something ancient and terrible stirred. The whispers began again, but this time they were no longer just words. They were a storm, a roaring flood of voices that filled my head, drowning my thoughts. Light the beacon, and as the shape began to emerge fully from the shadows, I realized the truth. I had come to this island to study the ocean, but the ocean had been waiting for me. The sea and everything it had taken had been watching. And now, it was time for me to join the others who had been lost to the deep. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of the damned and trembling. I knew there was no escape. I was already a part of it. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the suffocating silence of the lighthouse. The air had thickened, pressing in around me like an invisible weight. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath forming in misty clouds before me. And then, in the corner of the room, someone, began to take shape. The shape, twisted and writhed, like it was an entity that defied nature itself, something that had no true form. The whispers, once faint and distant, had become deafening now, swirling in my mind, filling every corner of my consciousness. Light the beacon. Light the beacon. The cries were no longer soft murmurs. They were sharp, demanding, pushing me toward the lantern, toward the ancient machinery that had once guided ships through stormy seas. But now, it felt as if the machinery itself was waiting for something, for me, to awaken it. I felt the presence grow stronger, more insistent. It was like a cold hand was reaching into my chest, squeezing my soul. The shape in the corner shifted again, its edges blurring, the darkness deepening. It was as if the very shadows themselves were bending and twisting to its will. The room had become a living thing, pulsing with malevolent intent. The shape stretched outward, tendrils of darkness reaching toward me, like some ancient creature testing the air for its next meal. My breath hitched as I felt something cold brush my arm, fingers made of ice. Instinctively, I took a step back, but there was nowhere to hide. The lighthouse had become a tomb, and the shape in the corner, it was its guardian. "Elena, you've come to free me." The voice rumbled from the darkness, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a voice, it was a force, deep, vibrating, like the ocean itself had spoken, its endless power washing over me. It was the voice of the sea. "No," I whispered in disbelief, "this isn't real." But the shadow shifted again, and that's when I saw it. The creature was no longer just a blur of darkness. It was an embodiment of the ocean's deepest horrors. Tentacles, slick and black as midnight, writhed in the corners of my vision. Jagged fins, like broken shards of glass, rose from the dark mass. Eyes, too many eyes, glowed from within the writhing mass. Each one reflected a light that wasn't there, filled with hunger, malice, and something older, so much older than the human mind could comprehend. It was a creature born from the deep, a thing of salt and shadow, something that existed in the crevices where no sunlight reached. It had lived through the rise and fall of civilizations, waiting for its time. It was the sea demon. "You've come to free me," the voice repeated, but now it had a seductive quality, like a lover's whisper. "You can feel it, can't you? The pull of the sea, the pull of power." I took another step back, my mind racing, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. I had read about creatures like this, ancient, forgotten things that lived in the depths, entities older than the seas themselves. But I hadn't believed. Not until now. The voice filled the room, vibrating through the very walls of the lighthouse. "I am the sea demon. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? You've felt the call. It is in your blood, Elena. It has always been in your blood." The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat. The blood, my blood, I knew it, deep down. I wasn't here by accident. I hadn't just come to study the ecosystem, to uncover the mysteries of the sea. The demon had known I would come. The demon's laughter filled the room, low and rumbling, like distant thunder. "I've been waiting for one like you," it said. "Your bloodline, Elena. It has always been tied to the sea. Your ancestors, sailors lost to the depths, and now you've come to join them." The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My parents, gone in the wreckage of a ship, lost to a storm. The whispers, the eerie feeling that had drawn me here, it wasn't just chance. I was a part of it. My blood was the key. The creature's presence suffocated me now, its form undulating and shifting in ways that defied reality. The shadows around me seemed to grow teeth, claws, a reflection of the demon's hunger. I tried to back away, but the walls closed in, narrowing the room until there was nowhere to go. "You cannot escape me, Elena," the demon growled, its voice darkening into something primal. "You are mine now. Light the beacon, and you will set me free. You will call to the storm, to the ships, to the souls of the lost. Together, we will claim them." The whispers returned, now like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. "Light it! Light the beacon!" They were no longer whispers but shrieks, howls of tortured souls. The demon was calling them, pulling them from the depths. I could feel their presence, cold and wrong, brushing against my skin like the touch of death itself. But amidst the terror, I felt something stir deep inside me. A spark of resistance, a sliver of clarity in the storm of fear. No, I couldn't. Before I could finish the thought, the demon's presence crashed over me like a wave. "Light it." The whisper became an order, a command I could not ignore. My body moved against my will. My hand reached for the lantern, fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold, rusted metal. I could hear the demon's laugh, low and triumphant. "Yes, yes. Light it and release us both." But just as my fingers touched the flint, the door to the lighthouse slammed open with a force that made the walls tremble. My head whipped around in a daze, pulse racing. Through the haze of fear, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, illuminated by the faint moonlight that filtered through the cracks. The figure was ghostly, faint, translucent, but unmistakable. "Anne," I gasped, my voice hoarse with disbelief. The spectral figure nodded, her face full of sorrow. Do not listen to him, Elena. You are not like the others. You do not belong to him." The sea demon roared in fury, its form twisting in a frenzy of shadows. "You dare defy me? You will all drown in the deep." But Anne stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. "You have no power here, demon, not yet." My hand, still frozen over the lantern, slowly began to pull away. The whispers had stopped. The demon's presence flickered, destabilizing. For the briefest of moments, I dared to hope. But then the demon's rage flared, and I realized this battle wasn't over. The demon had not been banished. It was just waiting. And whether I liked it or not, I was now part of the cursed dance that had begun long ago. The lighthouse trembled beneath me, the very walls groaning as the sea demon writhed in fury, its vast, shadowy form clawing at the edges of the room. The structure seemed to shake with every movement, as if the very building itself was about to be torn apart by the force of the creature's rage. I stood frozen, caught between a rising fear and something else, a desperate, suffocating sense that this battle was far from over. Anne's voice rang out, clear and unyielding, flickering like a candle in the wind. "You must listen, Elena. You can't defeat him like this. You have to make a choice." I could barely breathe. My heart hammered in my chest, each thud so loud it seemed to drown out the growls of the demon. The air around me felt heavier, thick with malice. The demon's eyes burned into me, ancient hunger reflecting in their depths. It spoke, its voice reverberating through my very bones. "You cannot escape me. You belong to me now, Elena Carter. You are mine to claim. All that remains is for you to light the beacon and summon the souls to join us." The room was suffocating. I could feel the pull of the lantern, its rusted, broken mechanism calling to me with the same demanding force as the whispers. The demon's power had invaded my mind, twisting my thoughts, suffocating every breath. I glanced at Anne, her ghostly form barely visible in the flickering shadows, standing in the doorway. "Anne," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "What am I supposed to do? How do I stop him?" Her eyes locked with mine, sorrow etched deep into her features. "You can't stop him by yourself. You have to understand, Elena. This place, this lighthouse, it was never just about the sea. It was always meant to be a prison, a trap for souls. The demon feeds on the lost, on those who wander too close to its reach. But there's a way to lock him away. One last sacrifice, one last chance." A chill passed over me, the dread sinking into my bones. "Sacrifice? What are you talking about?" Anne took a step forward, her form shimmering like a fragile thread in the wind. "I am bound to this place. My soul was lost to the demon long ago, just like the others who failed to see the truth. The demon feeds on us, the lost souls who wander these waters. But I was given one last chance to make things right." My stomach twisted. "No, you can't mean—" But Anne's expression was resolute, the haunting sadness in her eyes now replaced by something else. Something more powerful than fear. It was determination, acceptance. I felt my heart breaking as the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on me. "The beacon," Anne whispered, her voice trembling. "The beacon must remain dark. It was always meant to call the lost, to feed the demon. But only a true sacrifice can stop it. I gave my life to the sea. Now I give it again, so you don't have to follow the same path I did, so you can escape, so you can break free." My hands trembled, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "No, Anne, you can't. There has to be another way. There has to be something else we can do." Anne stepped closer, her translucent form glowing faintly in the dim light. "This is the only way, Elena. You cannot stop him alone. You must stay. You must become the keeper, just as I once did. The demon cannot leave unless you do, and so long as you remain, the souls of the lost will never be his. The lighthouse quaked again, the wind howling louder as the demon's rage spilled into the room. I could feel it, the crushing weight of its presence, its twisted hunger, all focused on me. It clawed at my mind, dragging me toward the light. But Anne's voice broke through the chaos. "You must let me go. You must let me free, Elena. If you don't, the demon will consume us both. This is the only way." My breath caught in my throat. "No, Anne, please. I can't lose you again. Not after everything. But Anne's gaze remained unwavering, and she reached out, her cold, ghostly hand brushing gently against my arm. It was cold, but not the bite of death. It was the chill of peace, the stillness that came with the end of a long struggle. "You are stronger than you know," she whispered. "The beacon will never be lit again. I will make sure of that, but you must stay, and make sure the demon never leaves." And then, as if the very air had been torn apart by the demon's fury, Anne's figure began to dissolve. Slowly, her form flickered, the light around her dimming, until only a faint shimmer remained. The room twisted around her, as though the very fabric of reality was bending in mourning. "Elena?" Anne's voice was a ghostly echo, fading into the wind. "Thank you." With those words, Anne was gone. Her form vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing but the cold touch of her final sacrifice. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The sea demon roared in fury, its rage reaching an unbearable crescendo. I stood alone in the lighthouse, my body shaking, the weight of Anne's sacrifice settling heavily in my chest. The whispers had quieted, but they had not gone. They would never go. Anne had freed herself, but I was now bound to the lighthouse, bound to the cursed beacon that had drawn me here. The demon's form reared back, its countless eyes filled with hatred, but it no longer had the strength to reach me. Anne's sacrifice had sealed its fate. The light would never shine again. But I was bound as well. The lighthouse would not let me go. I took a step toward the lantern, my fingers trembling as they brushed the cold metal. It was no longer a beacon of hope, it was a prison. I would be its keeper now, forever bound to its shadows. The whispers swirled around me, louder now, almost deafening. "Light it. Light the beacon." I closed my eyes, the weight of my decision crashing down on me. The demon may have been sealed away, but in the end, I knew what I had to do. I was the keeper now. The whispers would never stop. The souls would never cease their calls. And as the night stretched on, I became a part of the lighthouse's curse, forever bound to the lost souls, their voices echoing in my mind, their calls never ending. The night seemed to stretch on forever, as if the very passage of time had been altered within the cursed walls of the lighthouse. I stood at the top of the spiral staircase, my hand trembling on the rusted railing, my gaze fixed on the shattered lantern. The air around me was thick, heavy with the weight of Anne's sacrifice. Her ghostly form had faded away, leaving a hollow emptiness in its place, an absence that seemed to seep into my very bones. The sea demon had been banished, its form dissolving back into the depths from which it came, but its presence lingered, a shadow that would never fully retreat. I could feel it in the air, in the very walls of the lighthouse. My heart still pounded in my chest, but it was a different kind of pulse now, a rhythm that seemed to echo through my soul. It was both familiar and foreign, mine and something other. The whispers, faint at first, had begun to return the moment Anne had disappeared, and now they surrounded me, a constant hum in the back of my mind. Light it, light the beacon. the words weren't just whispers anymore. They were a compulsion, an undeniable pull that seemed to reach deep into my core, urging me to give in. I closed my eyes, pressing my palm to my forehead, trying to push the thoughts away. But the pull of the lighthouse was too strong. It was in my blood now, in the marrow of my bones, and with every passing second, the weight of my new reality pressed down on me more heavily. The sea demon was gone, but its mark remained, and in its wake, I had become its final anchor. I turned, my eyes falling on the broken windows that framed the moonlit sea below. The fog had thickened again, rolling in from the deep, just as it had on the night I arrived. The air was thick with salt, and I could almost taste the weight of the ocean in the breeze that tugged at my hair. The sea seemed to call to me now, its waves whispering just like the demon had. Softly at first, like a murmur in the back of my mind, but now a relentless pull that I could not ignore. Light it. Light the beacon. I gripped the lantern's cold metal frame, my fingers numbing against it. For the first time, I understood the weight of the choice I had made. Anne had given me the chance to escape, to free myself from the demon's curse, but in doing so, I had chosen to stay. I had chosen to remain. There was no going back, there was no escape. The lighthouse was mine now, and the voices, the whispers, would always be there, a presence that would haunt my mind for as long as I drew breath. I was its keeper, bound to the island, bound to the souls that had been lost to the sea. Their voices had once filled the lighthouse, trapped by the demon, but now they were mine, my constant companions. I stepped forward, my feet moving with an odd sort of grace, as though my body had already accepted the inevitable. I was no longer just a visitor. I had become a part of the lighthouse, its walls, its darkness, its endless hunger. The whispers had not stopped. In fact, they were louder now, more urgent, more insistent. I reached the base of the lantern, my fingers brushing over the intricate, weathered gears that had once powered the beacon. It was a relic now, long since forgotten by time, but it still held its power, its lure, a power I knew I could never sever, no matter how hard I tried. My mind screamed at me to resist, to step away, to break free. But even as I stood there, I knew it was useless. I had already made my choice, and now I was bound to it. I raised my hand, my fingers brushing against the cold, cracked glass of the lantern. The whispers surged again, filling my mind with their maddening cadence. Light it. Light the beacon. My breath came faster, my heart racing. The air around me seemed to shift, thickening like a living thing. The sea, the winds, the very lighthouse. It was all alive, alive in a way I could no longer deny. The demon's presence was gone, but its influence had become a part of me, a part of the island. It was in the very air I breathed, in the pulse of my own heart. And in that moment I knew I could never leave. Not now, not ever. The lantern flickered, as though it was responding to my touch, to the pull of my very essence. I was the keeper now, and the light would never shine again. But the demon had not been banished. It had merely changed form. It had become a part of the lighthouse, and I was its keeper. The weight of it settled upon me like a cloak made of stone. I could feel the souls of the lost around me now, the ones who had been trapped in the depths, whose lives had been claimed by the sea. They were no longer just whispers. They were voices, soft and mournful, their words echoing in my mind. I could hear them now, their cries for release, their need for salvation. But there was no salvation, not for them, not for me. I closed my eyes, my body trembling as the voices pressed in on me from all sides. I could feel the ocean's embrace, the pull of its depths. And for a moment, I was no longer Elena Carter, the marine biologist, the scientist, the woman who had once dreamed of unraveling the mysteries of the sea. I was something else now. I was part of it, part of the lighthouse, part of the ocean's endless hunger. The air grew thick again, the sound of the wind rising to a dull roar as the sea beyond the lighthouse stirred, its waves crashing violently against the cliffs below. The fog rolled in like a living thing, wrapping around the lighthouse in tendrils that seemed to pulse with dark intent. And I understood. I understood now that the lighthouse was never meant to guide. It was meant to lure, to trap, to feed, light the beacon. The voices surged once more, and I, my body trembling under the weight of their calls, raised my hand. The light flickered, a dying ember, but it would never go out completely. The souls of the lost would always be there. The whispers would never stop. The lighthouse, my prison, would remain. I, the new keeper, would never escape. Not now, not ever. And as the light remained dark, the sea roared beneath me, calling, waiting for the next soul to hear the call and join the eternal dance of the lost.